Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's PropMoto webinar. My name is Franco. I'm the editor and co-founder of PropMoto, and as always, I will be the moderator for this. At the end of the year, I think this is the last one we will do this year. So if you guys have joined us for any of our previous ones, thank you again, and Happy New Year. Looking forward to this one. It's a bit of a prediction webinar, which I think we will also dive deep into some of these topics as we always try to do. When it comes to smart buildings and what the future holds for the exciting smart building industry. Just a reminder for everyone and for the people who have not attended one of our webinars before that we will field your questions as they come in. So if you have something burning about anything we're talking about and you want any of these experts to weigh in, please go ahead and drop the question in the chat or the Q&A here, and I will bring it up. And hopefully you'll get an answer without the billable hours that are generally associated with this kind of help. This today we will be going over quite a bit when it comes to smart buildings and trying to really cover the whole gamut of what we think are the big trends that are affecting smart building tech, right, and how buildings are adopting to the landscape. So without further ado, I would like to intro in all of our expert panelists here. First, we have Thru Shivakumar, is CEO and co-founder of Cohesion. That's a smart building solution. Hi, Thru.
Hi, Rico. How are you?
Good to see you again.
Good. You too.
Next, we have Brian Higgins. He's CEO and founder of Additum Connect. It's a connectivity infrastructure company. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Franco. Good to see you again.
Thanks. Yeah, good to see you too. Thanks for joining. And last but not least, we have returning for yet another webinar is Joe Amador. He's managing director at Amador Consulting. It's a product and marketing strategy for smart buildings consulting firm. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Franco. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you are always welcome. I generally like to start these off with a bit of a kind of state of the market, state of the industry conversation. This is the way for us to kind of put out there some of the big forces that are influencing what we will likely be talking about later. So I think it's kind of hard to talk about commercial real estate without talking a bit about some of the struggles that commercial real estate has had over the few years. I think the future is looking a lot brighter. These conversations last year were quite a bit more bleak. But the conversations I have had, things are picking up. Certainly, it depends on sector, right? And geography, right? Office is struggling, but New York office seems to be doing pretty well. So there is certainly some nuances to this that we will get into, but just in general, I kind of want to get a sense of what you guys are hearing from your clients and the kind of people that you talk to every day. When we have an OI dropping, we have people that are less interested in investing in their buildings. I think it comes at an interesting time because right now investment is probably needed, right? You have pretty empirical evidence that the kind of the class A, trophy, really amenitized office buildings seem to be doing a lot better than kind of
B's and C's. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. The ones that I don't think anybody is all that excited to come in to work in. And so just talk to me about that, right? Where do we hit with that divide of like, do you kind of sit on the asset and wait, or are your clients saying, "Hey, we know that even though NOR is down, the only way to get through this hump is to spend some money and bring these up"? Drew, I'll start with you on this question. What are you hearing from the people you're talking to?
It's definitely a mixed bag. I think the Class A and trophy properties are investing and they're seeing a return on their investment with vacancy rates fairly low for those buildings. They view software and digital side, especially Cohesion, as an amenity for the building. So not just physical amenities, but really starting to shift how they're thinking about amenities for end user experience, more data driven tooling and digital operation tools for efficiency to cut expenses as a driver for them as well. So I'm seeing that very heavily being done in the office space as well as in workplaces. So companies that take up space in multi-tenanted spaces, so global real estate portfolios. I think Joe kind of mentioned, and he'll probably agree with me, that the B's and C's are still kind of, waiting a bit to invest any money. And I obviously am biased on this, but I think that they should be spending money because there's a lot that they can do to make buildings. There's a lot that people can do without spending a lot of money to make buildings attractive and inviting that aren't in the traditional sense of doing, spending a lot of money on lobby renovations, but rather if you do a mix of lobby plus amenities plus some, digital tooling and reduction of expenses, you probably can get there with a return on investment within the year of them doing it. So, I don't think there's a one size fits all, but rather we're seeing shades of everything happening.
Joe, is that what you're seeing? I mean, are people still spending some money? And it's a good point. Like the digital part is probably some of the cheapest money that you can spend, right? Like tearing down a lobby and, doing big capital improvements is expensive, where, this digital infrastructure is certainly a lot easier to plug in.
Yeah, I think the digital infrastructure is easier. I think sometimes there is hesitancy I'm hearing of, but that's an ongoing payment versus if I just do the lobby, I've done it. It's a CapEx expense. I know how to think through that. But the two drivers, more to Threw's point, building on what Threw you were saying, you've always had this issue, digital tooling as the goal, labor shortage, people aging out. That's just kind of like a slow boil problem. It's not like any building, at least from what I've seen, is going to lose all of their staff next year. It's just like, well, I might lose one next year, one in 3 years, one, this individual is 55 years old. So he's not retiring. She's not retiring yet, but I see retirement is in the midterm. So that's on one hand been a really good reason to invest in digital tooling, but it hasn't had like an inflection point of, oh, now I need to go augment my staff with technology in mass, right? There's absolutely buildings who are sophisticated, who are forward thinking, who realize like, I know what's happening. I know what's to come. The new one that I think fits into this a little bit is just rising energy costs. So to your point about NOI, again, it's not like this year energy costs are 40% higher than they were last year. It's 5, 10, 12% more. And it all is going to depend on where you're at, of course. But over multiple years, that becomes a really interesting reason to invest in digital tooling. And it kind of goes back to that thesis that a lot of companies have of, we can save you energy. Here's the ROI if we save you energy. And I think the ho-hum response you sometimes got was, oh, but my energy costs are about the same every year. And it's actually, I mean, when I was a product manager at both JCI and at Lucid, we heard this like, oh, but it's about what it was last year. So I'd rather just have like the spend be consistent because then no one's going to expect me to do better, right? I can just focus my efforts on other things. Now, doing the same in terms of my building is consuming the same amount of energy inevitably leads to higher costs every year, which will probably lead more than in the past to say, somebody from finance saying, well, why are we spending so much more money on energy? Like, we really should be doing something about this. And I think that maybe the combination of those, it's not always going to be priority 1, priority 2. They might flip in some cases. I think those might actually drive a little bit more investment in digital tooling, to Threw's point.
I can see that. And I'll throw in something that I have seen, which I think is interesting to this energy piece, is that, when the Trump administration first came in, or when Trump got elected, I think a lot of people thought, oh, energy is going to become cheaper, right? Drill, baby, drill, and all of this.
Yeah.
We will have more sources. And what I think people didn't expect is just the crazy increase in demand, right? Like, especially from the data centers and all of that. So yeah, I think across the board, energy is not only more expensive, but there's no end to where it's going to go, right? And so I think, people see that now. It's like, well, no matter what policy we have, no matter what president we have, just the economics of it are it's going to get more expensive. And so now I think there's a lot more kind of interest in investing in that, and especially when it comes to resiliency, right? Of being able to, know what your spend is instead of 1 month be hit by, spiking costs and hurt like that.
Yeah.
Well, and
We see something similar on the infrastructure side of the connectivity, where it mirrors the conversation you guys were just talking about with the energy, which is connectivity and NOI. We see reluctance on the commercial space to invest in, even though it generates additional NOI for the property, reducing other expenses or offsetting existing expenses. But we've seen in the Class B and Class C, which is where our service primarily gets deployed into, at least on the business side, we see a lot of reluctance where those property owners have been hesitant to invest because they're afraid of an OpEx expense every month, where they're more willing to spend CapEx even though that OpEx generates positive cash flow after about a 12-month ROI. It's an interesting dynamic where they're afraid to spend a little bit of money to make some money.
Yeah, and Joe's point is an interesting one of, yeah, sure, it's really expensive to do a one-time thing, but at least I don't have like an ongoing extra expense. I think we all kind of
Yeah.
feel that, right? You're like, oh, geez, it's only $3 a month, but like one more streaming service, like,
Yeah.
like it kind of death by 1,000
Yeah. I
paychecks. But
yeah, I think I know through you wanted to say something. What I've seen on that point, sometimes it's like a different muscle. Muscle is probably not the right word, but I think people know what I mean, right? I'm used to getting the money when I bought, like think of like a lot of real commercial real estate. Like we're buying this building, we're repositioning it, we're going to sell it in, I don't know, 8 years. So like, oh, in that capital plan, we're going to redo the lobby. It's like a very different muscle to say, oh, we're going to subscribe to this software for the next 8 years. And there is value. There's absolutely value. How do we quantify the value? Oh, we think about it differently. Maybe that is the right way to put it. It's just a bit of a different muscle, which in the past you really have to have like a push or a catalyst to say, no, we want to exercise that muscle.
mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think. Go ahead, Brian.
No, go ahead. I cut you off before.
No, that's okay. So Joe, completely agree. It's very interesting to see how everyone, is thinking about that CapEx versus OpEx spend. Oftentimes, I've seen we started an advisory business as well, helping people think through what is going to make more sense and what's the ROI on some of these initiatives from a overarching technology perspective, whether it's infrastructure or ongoing costs. And I think a lot of decisions during redesign and or new construction processes think about, well, what can I just put into the budget up front? And we'll worry about the OpEx with some of the decisions that are made. So like perhaps you're looking at an elevator, like an elevator contract, and you're putting out the elevator contract and you're like, well, you don't have the specs in there that have all of these elements of future proofing design and or controls or anything of that nature. And they're like, we'll change order that later and we'll deal with that later. But what's happening is that all of that starts to be OpEx later, right? So you start to think, I didn't think about the OpEx and I'll deal with the OpEx later, so long as I just have the CapEx. But today I'm not going to sign up for that subscription. I just think that there's a lot of unknowns on who's designing buildings and spaces versus who's operating them. And that tends to be something that I think there's lack of communication between and information.
That's a great point. Yeah.
I just had a conversation about 3 weeks ago with a Canadian real estate investor, and he was telling me that he was completely shocked to hear that a capital investment and an OpEx investment into his properties could actually change his long-term cap rate for sale and potential investors. Like there was a mental disconnect where investing in a subscription platform of some sort could actually turn into future revenue later. He had trouble like connecting A and B because it just wasn't part of the normal repertoire.
Yeah, it's certainly a bit of a paradigm shift there. And I mean, you still don't see it, when you see buildings for sale, they spend a lot of times talking about all the physical features and very little talking about the digital ones, if they mention it at all. So I think it comes through in due diligence and hopefully it comes through in the NOI, right? Like the profitability, but I wouldn't call it a sales point, at least as of yet for many buildings. I think it's an interesting time because on one hand, we can talk about all of the headwinds for, smart buildings, for offices, rising costs, rising energy costs, labor shortages, all the things we've already kind of touched on. But at the same time, I think we're finally really starting to see that occupiers are coming to terms with this kind of new definition of an office. And in a lot of ways, I think it takes a little bit of the pressure off of the office itself, right? This is no longer a place where we have to get X amount of productivity done, X amount of emails sent, right? Most companies have a hybrid format. They're okay with some of the heads down work happening outside of the office, right? And so let's just talk about how that kind of change of thinking of the end user has maybe trickled down into what offices is expected of them, right? And what kind of investment is needed. Joe, I'll start with you on this one, but talk to me just what you think about how we are kind of changing that definition of, what a smart building needs, and maybe how that can be harnessed by, owners and operators.
Yeah, I think the core point to make there, the definition of a smart building, there's almost two sides of it. It's widening, right? For some individual building owners, for them, a smart building might be the ability to have no assigned desks and allow everyone to hot desk and allow, at the end of the day, less actual square footage with the same number of people. And you could say there's solutions that do that. You also have firms that say our definition of a smart building is a tighter workflow, if you will, between we identify a problem in a base building system and it automatically creates a work order and it's automatically addressed and it's automatically fixed. I mean, automatically in the optimal sense, right? Like there might be a real problem that takes a while to figure out, but it's not. I go to my building automation system, I see there's an alarm, and I type it into the work order management. And I forgot to put some context in there, so whoever's reading the ticket doesn't actually know what's going on. Like that's the old way. So my point being, you do certainly have a lot of different use cases that fall under that bucket of smart building capability, which has led to, well, on one side, you have a lot of fragmentation of the buyers, right? So like the views of I want this or I want that. I want something to be more integrated across design and construction. This is very common in data centers, right? A lot of new data centers are going up. So for them, bundling or not bundling, but stitching together like the design of the building, the design of the base building systems in that data center with operating those systems optimally, that's much more of a linear thread than we bought this building, it's 30 years old, we're doing some upgrades, we're repositioning it. They might have a very disjointed connection. So I think I've made a couple of good examples of just there are differences in how you think of smart buildings based on what your who you are as a company, what your positioning is, what kind of assets you're in, and that's allowed a lot of different companies to offer a smart building solution. The one notable point I'll make is a lot of them still are going back to the ROI around energy savings. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I've talked to some buyers of these solutions and I've said, like you're talking about this interesting solution, but like all they talk about is energy savings when there's a lot of other value. Like the most interesting feedback I've gotten there is, yeah, my CFO only cares about energy savings or like only will underwrite based on energy savings. So it's not that the vendor can't make a better pitch or a more strong or a more multi kind of threaded pitch of the ROI. It's that we only care about energy because it's metered. We understand it really well. Like the idea of like you're more productive, it's maybe debatable. So that's kind of a multi-sided answer there, but that's what I would start with.
I think like just to add on to that, Joe kind of you said this perfectly, that there's different degrees to a smart building. And I think historically, and I think a lot of still the same thoughts are around smart buildings are around energy and building automation or building management systems. But I think the definition is there is no definition of a smart building. I think there's a whole lot of different areas of what adds to a smart building. And I don't think there's a single system that is completely holistic across what a smart building could be, right? So smart building, we haven't talked about security, but security is a lot of where investments have gone in this year. We've had some security incidents this year in large multi-tenanted buildings that had a lack of security protocols and investments into security infrastructure. If we think about security from a cyber perspective, we change up our Defender or any sort of cybersecurity software every 3 months. There's an update pushed, and we have physical security that people hope that will last for 8 years, but that's not how security works, right? Bad actors come in and they find a way to penetrate and create those threats. And so if you think about physical security, you need to be updating that probably just as much as those cyber threats, but that's not the way people think about it. So I think security and access control and fire alarming, elevators, all of that contribute to a smart building. And you can tie that smart building elements of those systems as end user experience. You can tie it to data and information and reaction. You could tie it to proactive management of these systems. So the ordering, if something's broken, you can order things. And so I think, the definition of smart buildings are just, there is no single definition and it varies by system. And Brian, I think you can talk on the networking side of it, right? There's a whole shift in that, and networking is the backbone of what needs to happen for a smart building. And so you think about end user experience, you think about utilities and energy and water and infrastructure, and water is a big, concern on the data center side. You talk about why people wanting to come into spaces and just like a digital key card versus a physical key card and how people interact. I just think that there's no single use case. And I'll end with this, that in the workplace side of things and occupier side of things, people really are, we've got this whole debate on understanding space utilization. How do I actually, how do I understand how much space I've used in terms of open areas, conference rooms, amenity spaces? How do I understand that in real time, not just point in time? Because designers and space planners look at point in time, not ongoing real time. And that's also smart buildings. And then if you tie that to reservations and visitor management systems, you're really stringing together and chaining a bunch of different workflows and use cases, which truly make up what could be the holistic smart building. But I think we're still talking about smart buildings in a 20 years ago manner, in my humble opinion.
I think you're right.
I think you can actually boil down the definition of a smart building to some degree by one common thread, and it's connectivity. Because you can't have a smart building without connectivity. Your smart building can do a lot of different things based off of what your objectives are, whether it's energy or access control. There's a lot of pieces that smart buildings can tack onto the system, but they're all based on connectivity. And so if you're going to measure what is and isn't a smart building, I think you have to start with the connectivity and then determine layers or levels of smart that are added on top of that. At the baseline for all of that smart connectivity is going to be an Ethernet infrastructure in this day and age. Everything comes in over Ethernet, or at least it should. And if you're looking at a technology that is not Ethernet based, you really should be going back to the vendor and saying, what are you pushing here? Because Ethernet is the standard for all data in the world at this point. And all of your smart building connectivity should be running over Ethernet at some level through the core. And you can start stacking on different technologies, whether it be access control, camera systems, HVAC, BMS, internet connectivity, you name it. You can put all of that on that Ethernet infrastructure, and you can have a common set of core pieces of infrastructure equipment that run the property on the baseline connectivity, at least. And then you have all of your smart technologies that run through that.
Yeah. I would add connectivity is a really good one. I would add data integration as the other one, right? Like a lot of times if you look at buildings, especially new construction buildings, there's a lot of data silos. And by having all those data silos, it's actually hard. There's a lot of basic smart building functionality that you aren't really able to achieve. I want to set a schedule for my building because I know when people come in and I know when they leave, and I don't want to have to do that 10 times or 5 times across different systems. So I think connectivity is obviously the foundation there because they have to be connected. And then the integration, there's much more than that. I think there's the whole other side of rethinking how you do work as a facility operator based on better data, based on more of outcome-based data versus we know there's something wrong. Now we have to go figure it out. Well, now it can be maybe not the core root cause, but it's a little bit more directional. Like this is probably the problem, and this is what you should do to go figure it out. And that's just a different way of running a building.
I think that goes into the varying levels of smart, but it all boils down to connectivity. Just how smart of a building is it?
Right.
Well, we have a good question that's pretty pertinent to this, so I'll bring it up now. It's what is the role of MSI to make buildings smart rather than apps and systems? Because that's all of the connectivity and data integration layer, right? I think some people think that like you slap on enough kind of apps and you have a smart building, but going to your point, Joe, the data isn't integrated if the apps aren't talking. How smart can it really be? So what is that role of the MSI?
Yeah, and MSI, just for anyone who's listening, that stands for Master Systems Integrator, which I would differentiate from a systems integrator, where most of the base building systems we're talking about across all the different systems, you have an OEM who builds the product, but you have an integrator who is coming in and actually configuring it, setting it up, and commissioning it, or somebody is commissioning it at the end to say this is working how you want it to work, right? Like for HVAC, like you have a schedule, you want people come in at 8 a.m. so you don't want heating to start up at 9:30. So really when I think of an MSI, just to, like give the foundational point, a systems integrator is typically focused on one of those systems, right? I am the systems integrator for your HVAC system, HVAC and building automation. I'm your systems integrator for lighting control. And those historically had been handled somewhat separately, really because when you're building a building, you have different subcontractors that are doing each of them, and they're really just all focused on delivering their required spec at usually the lowest cost. So that just creates the siloing from the beginning. So an MSI takes the approach of no, maybe not all of these systems being integrated together, but we will integrate multiple base building systems. It doesn't just have to be base building systems, but that's a part of it together, so that you as the operator of the building or somebody you designate to operate your building is able to operate this as a building with an integrated system. And those firms, on one hand, there's a lot of companies that can do MSI work. There are some companies that go to market as an MSI. There are some companies that really go to market as kind of a technology supplier, solution provider, but they do MSI work. So buyers, if anyone's listening, it can be difficult, to be totally frank, to find an MSI, right? Like, just like who is, because also if you go to a systems integrator, they probably say, well, I'm a master systems integrator. And I'm not saying they are or aren't. I'm just saying those are or should be different. There's a slight difference there. But I also see a lot of controls integrators who are technically robust, right? Controls are pretty complicated systems, building controls in a lot of cases. They can do some of this MSI work. And you're also seeing some OEMs who are making just product investments to say, well, we want natively for lighting and building automation to work together because we have products in both. And let's like not have to require two different gateways. Let's have one supervisory controller that does them both. So there's at this point, the goal is to bring the systems together. MSIs are a key part of that, but it's not there's no consensus of exactly how does that happen. Because some of the firms that have the product innovation, we want to integrate these systems together, they may not have as strong of a channel. So there are integrators, but there aren't as many integrators. And there's other companies who have really strong channels, but are really focused on one, two, or a couple different base building systems.
Sure.
Well,
Go ahead.
Joe, I agree with you, but I'll take even a little bit more pessimistic of a view here and maybe controversial. I don't think the word master is representative of what they do, because to your point, right, they don't do all the systems. And I think that there are integrators, that MSIs that we've seen on the MEP front, right, that come in during the design aspect. They'll talk about what needs to work together, but they don't talk about how they need to work together. And the how is really where it all starts to fall apart, where the how of what data needs to flow between each other. How does that integration actually work? We talk about integrations, but not all integrations are built the same. Like an integration can pass one-way information, or an integration can work in a two-way sync that then, allows for workflows to happen in either system, and those sync. And there's this shade of everything in between again. And so I think that the role of an MSI, I think we need to create a better role for a master technology versus just calling it systems, but overarching technology framework in the building, and have it say, we need to start with the user flows and how we want the building to operate, and like what does that operational aspect look like, and then flow that. If you can get in early from a design perspective, you start to do that, and you'll work with a system integrator or MSI, but it's going to be, you don't see again, I think that the OEMs may say they have this, but they are not, they're not MSIing other like agnostic set of building systems or building tools, right? They're looking at their siloed solution suite, and that's not always the end. It's not a great goal for end clients.
So I can give a little perspective there, because we are an OEM in that context, and our systems are deployed through systems integrators. And when it comes to how well integrated our systems get, with the other building platforms, whether it's a SI or an MSI, we're not always even familiar with the installation and aware of how that's being deployed, because as the OEM, we're providing the tools that we're asked for. We're providing the tools that we think are needed. And if an integration is needed by the building owner and that doesn't get communicated back to us, or someone just says, oh, it can't be done, or we don't think it's needed, it's really difficult for an OEM to help an MSI do better when that information may not come back. It may not make its way up.
Hmm. Drew, I wanted to throw out an idea. I mean, when I look, one of the points I made earlier was, you have a building being built from scratch, and that's a process. You also have a lot of people who are transacting buildings that are existing buildings. What's your thinking on the role of an MSI is actually just going to be different if it's we're building a new building and we're actually putting budget in to hire an MSI? My sense is that both in what the MSI is doing, a little bit different, but then we have not inherited. We bought a building, the systems are disjointed, but we're repositioning it. But I guess I honestly don't have a good sense of our MSIs going to market as we want to get into the spec process or more the owner directly with the owner process. But those are definitely two different processes. The MSI work, you could argue, is probably also going to be a little different.
Yeah, but I don't have a great answer for that. I think that the MSIs will play more on the new construction design process, and I
Yeah.
think that when you get into the redesign or repositioning of buildings, you're looking
Retrofit.
at
Yeah.
like you're looking at the general contractor or the project management team bringing in who they've worked with on all these trades and not necessarily having. And again, I've largely seen an MSI focus in on the building automation side and not as
Yeah.
much on the not as much on the security side. There's like the security integrator that doesn't necessarily talk to the MSI on the HVAC side of it, but yet there's still a lot of things that need to pass back and forth between them. And on the retrofit side, I think there's an acceptance largely for, well, this is what the building can do. And I do think that there's a level of education and knowledge gap that sits at
Mm-hmm.
that building level that says this is what we can do. And I think, in the defense of what's happening on the building or construction side of things, technology is changing so rapidly. And so I think that they don't know what they don't know, partially because everything is changing so fast. Like systems
Mm-hmm.
are becoming more open. A lot of pushes on software are happening. And so you can integrate more. There's different shades of integration, as we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, there's no, again, I know that I'm a broken record here, that there's no single solution, but I do think that for those listening, one of the things that I think needs to be added to the stack of advisors are smart building advisors that I think are more effective right now from a planning and design perspective versus the MSI that will figure out how all the actual nitty gritty might work together, but rather start with what are the end cases and then figure out what are we talking about?
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about systems integration, what is the entirety of what we need to be thinking about? Not just what the MSI might say they know how to do.
Right.
I'll add another perspective to that, and that's on the ROI of deploying these systems. If you go into a new property, a new project, and you plan out from the beginning the deployment of connectivity through the property, you have your low voltage figured out in the design phase before you start construction. Your ROI for that property for the connectivity is probably looking at about a 9-month window before you've made your initial investment back. If you instead go into and retrofit, even if the building hasn't been occupied yet, you retrofit the plans after the walls are already in, and you do the connectivity as an afterthought, or you just simply say we're going to figure it out later. It's not high on our priority list. You're now looking at a 14 to 18-month ROI just by delaying the process. It changes the ROI numbers quite a lot. So planning early is definitely worth it.
Yeah, I think this dovetails into really one of the kind of first trends that we have to talk about, right? Which is AI and just the proliferation of it. I mean, there has been lots of talk about AI in building systems for a while. I think the change is that people trust it a lot more, right? We all probably use AI for other things in our lives at this point. And so, what is that kind of growing role of AI? And can AI like really, we talk about automation, right? That's kind of like what everybody wants from AI. Like, can it sit on top of multiple systems yet and really act a bit as an integrator role? I mean, is that feasible for it to do? And maybe what would it look like for that to happen? through? I'll start with you on this one. What do you think?
I think that there's a lot of training that still needs to go into AI for it to be the integrator, right? The master integrator. I think that
Mhm.
there's some directional thoughts that you could get from AI today, but for it to play that role, like you can't just take a chat GPT and do a single building or like a Gemini type of agent and put it on a single building and say learn. It does have to be purpose built. It has to be trained. It's got to be looking at specific use cases and getting data from many buildings, right? Many different sources. And I think that the we're definitely wading into that water. Like I'm not saying that I think that's a starting trend in 2026, but what we have to start with is the openness of sharing that data and getting all that data and structuring it so that you can learn from it and start to look at how to train those models to be supervisory. I think we're still a few years out from it playing a full master systems integrator role because it does need a lot of training. But just from the role of AI, I think as a whole, we are there in different systems. I don't think cross system yet is
Right.
fully there. I think if we break down AI in real estate into different things, you've got AI in workflows, you've got AI for system automations, and then you've got AI for analysis and for analytics and to recommend actions. And I think that the integrator that you're talking about would span all three of those things.
Mhm.
So I think that we'll start with these three, and Joe or Brian, you might have a fourth or fifth bucket on that, on how AI would play into real estate.
Yeah.
I just have
Yeah, I think.
one
Go
thought
ahead,
on
Brian. Yeah, you
AI.
go.
Sorry. I don't think the objective that people have is AI itself. The objective is high quality results in less time, less input effort. AI is just the current trend on how to achieve that. It's really just automation with a fancier process. It's the same thing we've been striving for years in technology, in automating the workflow so you spend less time to get better, more accurate results. Um, and I think any conversation about AI needs to keep that in the back of your mind as you're talking about what is the objective of AI. It's really just to get better results quicker. So any good way of achieving that automation, whether it's AI or not, if you achieve the objective, that should be the focus.
Yeah,
I just like to guard
yeah, we
AI
haven't
conversations with that one.
we haven't necessarily gotten to the stage of AI deployment where we're really honing in on the outcome. We're still, and I see this more from the vendor side because they're all trying to really go to market and say, like, we have something really innovative. But the general message I am hearing is we have an AI feature set or functionality. And in some cases, it's companies that are 30 years old, and you kind of wonder, like, oh, what is the real AI here? But I think where we will get to, and I don't know if this is 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. I mean, I think it's probably more than 1 year, is not really talking about AI as it's AI. Just like no company really says we're internet enabled, like we're an internet enabled smart buildings company. It's like it's obvious, right? Like obviously you're using the internet, but what you're delivering is energy savings, workforce augmentation, equipment life extension, or equipment reduction in unplanned equipment maintenance. The only other point I was going to make, a little unrelated, but still about AI, is Deloitte has they call it the Real Estate Outlook report or study or survey, and the 2026 one came out recently. And in there, they were comparing bar charts of a specific survey question around your deployment as a real estate organization around AI, and they compared the 25 responses and the 2026 responses. And there was this kind of like flip of 2025. A lot of firms said we're deploying AI and we're deploying it heavily, and it's flipped to few have said that in 26, and a lot of them have said we've had some trouble or struggles with data readiness. I don't know if data readiness was the term, but it's like that's an issue that I think needs to be addressed, and it's not always something that can be addressed by an individual vendor, because sometimes the data challenges are more kind of institutional. Maybe institutional is the wrong word, but like the way you have managed your data for the past 20 years does not jive with AI. We want to solve a solution for you, but like that's a huge problem to solve. If you want us to do it for you, you might not want to pay for it. So what do we do? And that's like You have a lot of data on clipboards. You have a lot of data on just other types of paper-based systems. You have a lot of different systems with data that's just not organized or not tagged or not named in a proper convention. And when I looked at that survey, my first thought was, oh, that is exactly what's happening. I've seen non-buildings, non-real estate surveys that say similar things, right? Like this is the challenge, the friction of deploying AI is not AI products are not ready. It's not people aren't willing. It's not like we don't want to change how we're doing things. It's we can't use it yet because our data is not clean.
But
Clean
I
is maybe a
think,
good single term. Yeah, go ahead.
Joe, just to like hop, I guess to ask you
Yeah.
if you see the same thing. I'm seeing the same. I'm seeing that, we're in this stage where everyone wants what I'm seeing is they understand that they have a data like management gap, right? What either they can't access it or they can't
Yeah.
make sense of it. But I think we're making this kind of repeated mistake that organizations are hiring internally to say, I'm going to try and make sense of all these different data sets and normalize and structure these data sets where they might not even have an expertise to say, let's just take space utilization, for example, like occupancy, dwell times. How do I look at the data and say, this is how long somebody has, stayed in a space? Because that data coming off of a sensor is you can't just take A and B and say A minus B
Right.
equals dwell time. But that's the thinking that I'm seeing us make, that kind of same mistake, right? I'm going to build internally and I'm going to make sense of that data. And in 5 years, we're going to see that people are like, you know what? I'm not actually an expert internally. I got to buy this software. I don't, we're in this, like, I don't want to share my real estate data. Like if we think about real estate data, it's probably more benign than like financial data.
Most data sets.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like when people are like, I don't, I want to protect my data. There are data sets that you got to protect, right? Like if you're doing facial recognition technology or access control, a little bit around that because there's PII implications. But how my space is being heated and cooled, like I'm not sure that needs such high level of protection that you can actually learn off of your portfolios and regionally and all of that. So
or like you sometimes hear it framed as, if I knew that, like if I knew that your employees were only going to the office 4 hours every day and not on Fridays, I mean, that would be the type of information that if somebody was to hack a system like you're describing through that, does your competitor, like, what do they do with that? Right. Like, oh, like,
right.
I don't know. Like maybe they were really productive at working at home. Like some companies are, some companies aren't.
Yeah.
So but yeah.
I wanted to touch on another topic, and I think AI is going to be a through line for a lot of these, right? But just the idea of consolidation, right? And where the industry is going. Obviously, we saw prop tech companies, proliferate for 4 or 5 years. Obviously, I think we've seen less of them come up, and there has been some consolidation, right? The MRIs and the Johnson Controls and the Honeywells of the world are buying up companies and kind of trying to be that one company that kind of sits on top of it. Do you guys think that is necessary, right? That you need to have this kind of one master basically vendor that is able to integrate, or does AI maybe allow, I heard some interesting things about like, systems of record. That was everybody's, goal, is to be the system of record, super sticky, really great. Well, does AI make the system of record as valuable, right? If I can just automatically import a bunch of data, clean it up, have my AI clean it up and bring it in, does that maybe give a little bit more runway to have more vendors instead of kind of a couple giant ones that do everything? Brian, I haven't started with you, so I'll put you on the hot seat.
I have mixed feelings on this one because on one hand, I love the idea of big acquisitions. As an OEM, that's attractive to me. But
Exits.
In reality, I think there's plenty of space. New technology, the barriers to entry are a lot less than they were 20 years ago, when every piece of technology was a physical object that had to be engineered and manufactured for that purpose. Nowadays, with software, we can create technology that serves jobs digitally. So you can come in as a smaller company and provide a very good quality product. You can do access control in software now, where you used to have physical hardware that had everything programmed into it inside the building. your key card databases and such. So I think there's definitely a space for the smaller players that are not as monolithically integrated in their uh, vertical corporation stack to come
Mhm.
in and fill those gaps. A
I was
little
going to add a
biased.
couple. Oh, yeah. So to your core question, like buy from a single solution provider versus multiple, I have not seen a consensus here. And I think a lot of the dependency on which way do you go is how big is your portfolio? What's the current state of systems in your building? I mean, most buildings are already built, right? So we talk a little bit about new construction. There is a lot of money being spent to build out new buildings, but it's a small fraction of the total building stock. So a lot of the we want to scale a smart building solution, you probably have to solve the existing buildings more than the new buildings, but you probably should think about both. So my point being, if you're a campus, a portfolio, whatever it is, it's unlikely that you've centralized any of these systems we described with one vendor anyway. Just like the costs of doing so are prohibitive. So then the question becomes, well, of those incumbents that have a core software or hardware plus software plus service, like a building automation system vendor, you probably are working with multiple of them. They all have solutions that could be that kind of full or generally could be that full solution, but you might look at it and say, well, but they're one of three that I'm working with. So why would I pick them over the two peers that also have comparable solutions? And I'm not even going to get to the debate of like, are these really full blown? Are these really functional? Are these really, because I think in some cases, yes, in some cases, no. It's just, do you even make that decision? And what I have heard is in some cases, you just say, it's easier for us to buy everything from one vendor. It's just like a procurement simplicity decision. In other cases, there's no one logical vendor for us to select anyway to do all of this because we're just so fragmented. If you go up and you look at the whole market, there's a huge amount of fragmentation. This is something I'm writing about for my newsletter. Probably it won't be until next year, but like every level of every stakeholder in our market is very fragmented, right? The owners, like the largest owner of commercial real estate a few years ago was Blackstone, and they owned 1.5% of all office space in America. Like the largest owned 1.5%. And if you get to like department stores, grocery stores, retail, it gets a little more like restaurants, like it gets a little bit more concentrated, but it's really not very concentrated. And then you go down to, I was writing about like market share, like how big is the controls market? We just look at building automation systems. Even the big guys, if that's a $50 billion market, $100 billion market, $150 billion market, JCI and Honeywell both every year are making 5 to 7 billion in revenue in their controls business. And they're two of the four biggest, but that's small when that's a small portion. They're not as dominant from a revenue point of view as we might think if you just do some basic math. The last one I'll touch on really quickly. The what does this mean for consolidation? I we hear a lot of consolidation. What I would tell you is it is true that there are a lot of deals. I track all those deals. There's a lot. The OEMs, like the big incumbents, are the most common acquirer, although they probably aren't over 50% of all acquisitions. I'm not sure we actually have this like surge in M&A activity. I could see in 5 years the market being just as fragmented on the vendor side, partially because it will absolutely be just as fragmented on the buyer side. I don't know that in 5 years we're going to see a commercial real estate firm that has like 30, 20, even 10%, even 5%, let's say, of the office space market. I don't think it'll happen. And if it is, it's like one, they're kind of an outlier versus like the new trend.
Yeah. And the fragmentation is a great point. I've always been, so interested in how a lot of these large buildings are owned, right? They're owned by
Yeah.
10, 15 owner groups, right? That
Yeah.
this
When you
has
get
a
to the
bridge
fund level,
loan,
it's even
this
more
person
fragmented.
came
Yeah.
in and all it takes is for one of those to say like, oh, hey, well, we use this, like we use Yardi, right? And so now you're dealing with like,
Yeah.
even if you wanted to switch systems, like, well, the owner of the building says you can't, so like
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
you have this whole new stack. You have to figure everything out, right? It's very customized. Drew, what are your thoughts on this, and who are you in talks for acquisitions with now?
No one. So I'll start with that. I think on the acquisition side, I think that there's a lot of companies that are doing great things that are small, and to really achieve scale, it's going to be either from an acquisition standpoint or it's going to be through channel partnerships, right? So there's going to be
Mm-hmm.
a level of, camaraderie and partnership that's going to happen. It's happening today and it's going to continue to happen. I think when we talk about the large OEMs, like Joe mentioned, like your Honeywells or, and
Yeah.
the many
All the
of them,
public companies that, yeah.
exactly. They I think that the hard part about acquisitions on that side is that they're not software companies, right? They're not software digital companies. They are controls companies at the core, and they know how to do that. Like their channels are set up for distribution and rolling trucks and service lines and of that nature. And bringing in software is a very different, as we all know, software is a very different animal. How you sell it, how you go to market, how you add value to try and train up a massive distribution kind of infrastructure of folks. It takes a lot to be able to do that. So I think a lot of people will automatically say, well, acquisitions are really hard because it failed, or this acquisition got killed, or this product got killed. It's not the product itself. It's the fact that the migration plan, the integration plan, all of that failed. That company to the mix, because at the end of the day, a lot of these acquisitions are happening to help essentially sell more of the core business, which is the controls. So then it's, ancillary revenue, and ancillary revenue gets very little investment. So then you start to see the slow death of these companies because you're not seeing that. So my opinion is that I do think that there should be more of this, but I think that the integration plan from OEMs need to be realistic and need to be a lot more thoughtful and strategic as you start to see them come in. And I think that more on M&A front, I do think that software companies alike should start thinking about, strategically, what value do we add, so that as we, kind of pulling us back full circle, we talked about a smart building not having a single lane, right? And if we want, not 15 software solutions that can offer up a smart building, you want to start to see consolidation to say, I can do more things in one platform. Procurement for either procurement ease and or cost ease or data sharing, all of that are the benefits of what we start to see in mergers across software businesses and startups and even larger, like late stage companies. But I do think that we're probably better off on software consolidation than controls OEMs buying up software companies.
Yeah. Couple quick, data points, or not data points, but points. So one interesting thing about a lot of the OEMs we're describing, in general, they've been going through this multi-year process of what others and I call deconglomeration. So they're all getting much more focused. And some of the HVAC companies are the best example of that, where they just are HVAC or HVAC and other refrigeration that is very similar from a core foundational, refrigeration cycle principles. So you could argue, does that make them a little bit better at doing some of the things Drew's talking about? Time will tell. I would say they seem to be more focused on digital strategies, software. You could think back to GE when now they're three different companies, but they had GE Predix that was the multi-industrial cloud-based platform that did everything. And you don't really hear about it anymore. Outside of our market, so not something I really track closely, but you could argue one of the challenges there was you're building a software product that is for monitoring airplane engines and also monitoring generators and also monitoring CT CAT scanners, right? Because those were all things that GE did. I would argue, is there really that much relationship between them from a cloud-based software point of view? Maybe some, but maybe not. So as you become nimbler and say, we're just focusing on building controls, or we're just focusing on HVAC, that might be a bit of a change in how they do things. The other one I'll say is, Drew makes very good points. I don't see an end in sight to these bigger firms investing in digital technology, their digital business. Where does that lead? I mean, I used to work at JCI as a product manager exactly on this type of product. And we kind of deprecated that product, but back to the JCI investing in another product, and not trying to pick on them. I'm just saying they seem to view this as strategic, even if they haven't yet quite figured out in all cases, how do we really embed this in our business? And I don't know that I see that ending anytime soon.
Yeah, to your point, Joe, I think Honeywell has basically three business lines now, and one of them is smart buildings, right? It's
well, they're basically splitting their bit. So they're splitting. The big split is they have an aerospace business,
right,
completely separate, and they have an automation business. Automation is 55% industrial automation, 45% building automation. So they've said there's a lot of sharing of the code base, which makes sense, right? A SCADA system, a building automation system, very feasible. You go to automation or aerospace, I think it's different. And then they also had split out they call it Solstice. It is now a completely public company, independent. and that's advanced materials. The thing they do that's relevant for us is they actually make refrigerants. So you think of like in your HVAC system, what is helping you move heat around? It's the refrigerant. And Honeywell is actually one of the biggest suppliers of that, but that's now not Honeywell. It's called Solstice is the company's name.
Deconglomerization for sure. Well,
Yeah.
the last point I want to touch on really quickly here is customization. I just think that obviously, like, I think hotels was probably the first one to really do this, right? Have like very highly branded, very highly specialized, buildings. Multifamily has certainly leaned more into this. Now I think you're starting to see this also in office, right? Where we're kind of realizing it's not the kind of the one office for every company. How does technology play into this? How does technology allow buildings and building owners to create maybe kind of a more customizable package that they can attract their tenants a little bit better, right? Instead of just having something that kind of fits everybody but isn't really great for anyone. Brian, I'll start with you again on this one.
It's a good question. I mean, we're probably 80% on the multifamily. I see the branding and the differentiation pretty clearly on the multifamily. We don't see a lot of it on the commercial side, at least not that's relevant to our business. It's more so just providing a really good package for the tenant. We don't see a lot of customization in that manner commercially. We do see lots of it residentially, though.
Sure. Yeah, obviously multifamily. Drew, have you seen any on the commercial side?
Yeah, well, I think you said the word customization from hotels, and now we're seeing that. I actually would say that less so the word customization, more so the word hospitality, which is coming, right? Saying that hotels have, everyone kind of thinks that hotels had concierge, and so that was hospitality. But I think you make a really good point that customization of the technology by room was what hospitality really means. It's not necessarily about the single person that you make, dinner reservations down the street. It's really that you can customize your room settings. Like I can pull down shades, I can set my heating, and I can, have my TV say, welcome to the hotel through, like, here's what's on your menu for today. Like that customization is really hospitality. And we're bringing a lot of that into office. I personally think that we're not, we got a long ways to go in that we're adding people, not technology, to the answer of that, that customization. And we're saying, hey, we need a lot more people to be these, these workplace concierge, or, we'll have people solve the problem versus technology tools and self-service tools. And if we think generationally, right, you talk to folks and they're like, I need that person that says, hello, Ms. Shivakumar, welcome to the building. You talk to a Gen Zer and they're like, please don't talk to me.
I don't want that. Yeah.
I don't want that. That is awful. I can say hello to somebody else. Like, please don't do that. But I'll have an app talk to me because that's what I engage in. A lot of my interactions is sitting inside my smartphone, and you're seeing interactions with AI agents. This is where it's going. It's not to add to that. So I think we just need to really think about, like, what does customization and hospitality mean? And I do think that people are introducing the concept, not necessarily executing in the way that I think we first saw from a hotel's.
Joe, really quickly, anything to add?
Yeah. I mean, these are all great points. The move to like make everything more of a hospitality like experience is absolutely happening. I was thinking, from a just general customization point of view, it's like with all the fragmentation that leads to a lot of customization. What I mean is you just have a lot of touch points of people on the value chain and a lot of organizations. And historically in this market, base building systems, delivering a building to somebody, we've been very oriented towards delivering what they're looking for. And sometimes with cloud-based software, it's a little bit more of a, this is the product, we're selling you the product. I mean, there's way more to talk about, but I think that gives people a taste. And a lot of what I think about with clients of mine of just like, how do you balance those two factors? Because it has a lot of impact on just the company in general.
Completely agree.
Well, I think just to, one last thought to close Joe out. Sorry, Brian. Just one thought there. When you say customization, I think that we have to understand that the world is going towards individualization, right? So this idea of customization and smart buildings, it's really about It's addressing how people have a lot more opinions. They want their spaces to deliver individualized results and comfort levels. And that's something that I think that's the big shift, because 10, 15 years ago, we went into an office building. We said, oh, the office building is cold. It is what it is. I bring extra layers. Now it's, I don't want to be cold. And so that the responsiveness, it's just, the world is shifting, and we need how we operate those spaces.
Yeah.
Need to kind of adapt.
Well, I'm going to have to leave it there. We're at the top of the hour. I just wanted to thank everybody for joining. If anybody would like to be introduced to any of the panelists, please send me an email. It's franco@propmoto.com. That's FRANCO@propmoto.com. Drew, Joe, Brian, thanks again for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. And good to share this.